And they only stayed about a week. Yeah, about a week to a week and a half, and then they may have taken some of our copies of our records back and maybe completed their audit.
And what month, or if you don't remember the date, what month were they actually physically at the district making those requests and copying documents?
We can get you the exact date of that.
That would be great.
Because they were back and forth. You know, they would come in and they said, we'll be back in a few days. So, because they were working several audits at a time.
And so over that period of time, they spent about a week's worth of time just at the district reviewing documents?
Correct.
Okay. And they were reviewing auditing records from March of 2022 till August of 2022, right?
That is correct.
And so when you said 2 fiscal years, what you're talking about is that overlapped. It was the end of one fiscal year and then the beginning of another.
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Washington issued a 2021 internal audit report that's obviously been widely disseminated about a year ago. And he had reviewed, I think, his review was of the 2020 either fiscal year or calendar year, and found a lot of the same issues. I had asked the board in February of last year for us to review that memo and examine the issues that he brought to us, so that we could ask questions and avoid what's now just happened with the State Department. Do you think that had the board ever met, because the board has not had a substantive conversation about Mr. Washington's memo, and I was told specifically, in fact, in an email, that we were going to let the legal process regarding Mr. Brady take its course. The problem is that Mr. Washington raised issues that were outside of Mr. Brady's specific conduct. Is there a role for the board to play to help oversee financial management to avoid being placed on fiscal watch status?
Commissioner Lovenak, that is a question for the board, and I'll be happy to respond to that. Absolutely. That is our responsibility. That is one of the reasons why we have an internal auditor that does the internal audits. He shows us a scope of work, things that's going to be audited, as well as he takes on special projects. As you recalled in the audit that you're talking about, Mr. Washington had come in and done an audit. You're correct, but he did not get a chance to come in and do his follow-up audit before the state audit. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Washington. You didn't get a chance to do the follow-up audit because this audit was going on. That is correct? Okay, so we have an individual that works on our behalf to bring those findings to us. So even at this point right now, at this juncture, we've had an external auditor, and then we've had the State Department come in and audit, but our internal auditor has not had a chance to come back in because I believe that's an 18-month window. And I think we're somewhere within the 12 months. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I got this in my head right. Yes, if you can just answer that for me.
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioners, Dr. Willis-William. My auditing standards state that a follow-up audit should be done between 6 to 18 months after the conclusion of the audit, yes.
So within 6 months, 6 to 18 at the outside, 6 at the earliest. And that doesn't prohibit the board from responding to your memo to the board and asking questions and engaging in a discussion about your findings, right?
I don't speak to the activities of the board. Board
but
conducts them.
But there's nothing, like, if we wanted to meet with you about that memo, you wouldn't say, I can't talk to you about that until I've done my follow-up, right? You'd answer questions about your findings.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Let me speak to that. Mr. Washington, I recall the meeting, Loverson High School. Did you not come and speak to that audit report to this board, and we asked detailed questions? We asked whether or not you had found fraud. has fraud ever been found? Were some of the questions I recall asking you, and that was in regards to your audit. Am I correct?
Yes, that was a public session.
Right. So did not the board, to Mr. Womanak's point, did not the board at that particular meeting ask questions about your findings?
As I recall, yes. They
And
asked
thank you.
questions
Thank you.
Let me say this, and I'll publish the email that I sent to Cheryl Harris on February 11th, begging us to actually talk about your findings. Because your findings, you found that the use of the P card by someone other than the card holder, same as State Department. You found that purchases were shipped to a residence, same as the State Department. You found that people were splitting transactions, same as the State Department. You found that the required district forms were missing or not completed properly, same as the State Department. This is a year and a half before the State Department's records. You were viewing things in 2020. You found that there were unauthorized signatures on monthly P card statements. You found that there appeared to be different people signing the same name. And you found that P card statements were not reviewed by deadlines. In fact, in some instances, they were not reviewed until 240 days after the statement came out, which directly relates to Mr. Brady's conduct, because he obviously misspent using someone else's credit card, $2,000 at the Holiday Inn Express, and that wasn't uncovered until people started to look into him because he directly disobeyed his supervisor's request about a whole different procurement issue. So it wasn't some internal procedure that would have caught Mr. Brady. That would have happened in January, a month after he illegally spent money using someone else's cards. So I guess my point is, I asked that we sit down and talk about all of these findings, and we never did. The response was, let the legal process play out. But that doesn't prevent us from talking about Mr. Washington's other findings regarding this, and I think we abdicated our role, and then the legal process that's played out, we've now been accused in open court of obstructing that legal process. So I think we really do need to step back, and I think the board's got to take its audit role more seriously. There is no audit committee because it was determined that the entire board should perform that role. We just didn't perform it in this instance. We should have met after the Mr. Brady incident and after Mr. Washington raised all these issues, and we really should have met. And I asked it to be a work session topic at one point. It just never was. So I think the board has abdicated its role. I think we could have avoided this. You know, I know that people want to minimize the State Department's findings and all of that, but we could have avoided all this, I believe, had the board actually taken its role more seriously when we had the chance. Thank you, Chairwoman Harris, and thank you, Mr. Washington, and thank you for your 2021 report.
Let me respond to a few things that Mr. Lomanak stated. Mr. Lomanak, you can only speak for yourself. You cannot say what the board did not take action on, because that would be very dishonest. A whole lot of mistruths being told. I recall a board meeting where we went into great details about all of these items that we are talking about. And if I'm understanding the scope of time that the State Department went back and reviewed, some of that even overlaps with some of the scope of time that Mr. Washington also did an audit.
No, not exactly.
Okay, it's at the tail end.
My audit period was
In
calendar year 2020.
2020.
Calendar year 2020.
Right.
The State Department of Education's review encompassed transactions from
Right.
March 22 to August 22.
Right. So to the point of the board not taking their role serious, I think that's not a fair statement. I think that the board does take their role very seriously. I think we can only speak for ourselves. So, you know, it would be fair to say maybe, Mr. Lomanak, you feel you didn't take your role seriously, but I think we took our roles very seriously in making sure that what the internal auditor were giving to us was being implemented, etc. Even when I spoke to the auditor about his follow-up audit, he shared with me, because this other audit was going on, in other words, because it had been done, and you correct me if I'm wrong, your opportunity to come in and review this, they've already done a review of which you would have done.
Well, given that a regulatory body comes in, it would be inappropriate for me to get in the way, if you will.
Right.
So I removed myself from a follow-up and allowed the State Department to do their audit.
Right. So, and I'm glad we have you at the mic, because I have a lot of questions. I know we rely on you very heavily, Mr. Washington, as our internal auditor. You've been at the table when the State Department came in and shared their findings. Were you made aware?
At the table?
Were you made aware?
Yes.
Okay. Let me rephrase that, because I don't want to misspeak on nobody. That's not fair. We'll get to that later. You've been shared the same information that the board has gotten,
Correct, yes.
and we trust you. Do these findings rise to the level of this district being placed on fiscal watch in your personal, professional level? I understand why a district can be put on fiscal watch. I've heard what the external auditors have said, and they said no material findings for X, Y, Z, and the third. You're the internal auditor.
Well, it's not just my professional opinion, but also to put it in proper context, you can look at South Carolina Code, I think it's 59-2090, if I'm not mistaken. I can research that.
Okay.
Sure, and also the regulations that are put forth by the State Department. It outlines 5 specific criteria for being put on fiscal watch. And I think it's pretty clear that those 4, there's no debate. There's no way we should be put on fiscal watch based on those 4 criteria.
On those criteria.
The 5th one does speak to if they come in and do an audit and they find significant deficiencies, material weaknesses, continual noncompliance, that is a factor that may allow the superintendent of education to put us on a fiscal watch.
Right.
I don't think that the audit that they put forth rises to that level.
And I appreciate that, because as I said, and everybody at this table, as a board, we take what you do very seriously. And to be put on fiscal watch, which is a low level, but there are some requirements to be put on fiscal watch. And the external auditor is saying there isn't material findings that this should have happened. You're the internal auditor, and you're practically saying the same thing to us tonight, that based on their requirement, their rubric, we should have never been put on fiscal watch.
And again, I'm speaking specifically to their report. And anywhere in their report where you find that terminology regarding whether or not there were significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, their job as auditors is to present the report to their upper level of management. And my understanding is that level makes the determination as to whether or not you should be put on fiscal watch.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Mr. Washington. Are there any additional questions at this time? I have some more, but I'm going to yield to my colleagues. Commissioner Devine.
Thank you, Chairwoman Harris. This goes to Ms. Allen or whomever with the question and answers. Can you tell us if single users were responsible for multiple findings?
Single users
were responsible
multiple users, not
yes,
single users.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Multiple users or car holders.
Correct.
Various. It's not any specific 1 or 2 persons. It was across the board.
Okay.
And we reviewed that, and those violations are put in place as such, where we have the consequences that we notify those particular violators.
Okay.
Is that so?
And is this an annual audit that's performed by this regulatory body regarding this item, or is this a random audit performed by this regulatory body?
This was a random. This is the first time.
Okay. And you've been in this position for how long as director?
Since 2020.
Okay.
January of 2020.
But you've been in this department for how long?
I've been in the department, I want to say 17 years.
Your 17 years. This is the first random audit we received from this regulatory body pertaining to PCARs in particular.
That's correct.
All right. And I don't know if you can answer this, or if the CFO or internal auditor. Do we know the regulatory body's tolerance or risk management for errors or rate of error for the regulatory body?
We don't know, and that's one of the questions we ask. We do know based on the population of what they're tested and the number of occurrence, you can lead to the conclusion that these are not significant findings. They are guided, and you may be able to speak more to that. The Yellow Book, and I think Kevin can speak a little bit more about the standards they use for auditing. So I'm gonna let him talk a little bit more about that since that's in the auditing realm.
And in the audit universe, and I don't know what that is, what is the typical tolerance level for auditing or rate of error for organizations that you are familiar with or that you've had the opportunity to audit?
Yeah, I can't speak to what the State Department of Education does. In my audit, if you go back to 2020, my audit is more of an internal process, and it's there to identify opportunities to improve. As you recall, it does not even state that there were any significant financial impact to any of the conditions that I noted during the audit. Again, I used the word conditions, not findings. It's a roadmap to improve the process. That's what the internal audit process is. It's a method of improving the operations. There was nothing significant, no material in my audit that was found. No significant financial impact. I did state that there was the risk of a regulatory body coming in, and that was noteworthy because a regulatory body doesn't care about the error rate or the financial impact. It's all about compliance. So when you see one item out of
24.
it would not show up in my audit report because the occurrence rate is not significant enough to report on.
Okay, so let me be very clear. I think this board has been very diligent in its work. We take this very seriously. I know some may think that we don't, but we do. Let me speak for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I take this very seriously, and I appreciate staff acknowledging that we have a challenge before us. We've addressed it. We will move forward. We look forward to the next audit that comes through. That rate of error should be even less than what we have now, 4.2% and 1.8%. We hope that is down to 0. But we know we work with people, and you have the human error rate, and so we have to be mindful of of looking at this thing from a holistic perspective. Our annual budget is over $300 million, close to $400 million, almost $750 million that run through this organization. And again,